Good evening. My name is Michaela Swikowski, and I will be presenting on Swahili. Swahili is the official language in Tanzania and Kenya, but it is also spoken in Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Comoros Islands, Burundi, Rwanda, northern Zambia, and Oman. It is part of the Bantu language system, but because of its location in Africa of where it is spoken, it is also considered part of the Niger-Congo languages. However, it is a lingua franca in most of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. This means that it is not required, but many people know it and are able to use it to communicate with other people from Africa. There are 15 coastal and island dialects, and there are numerous other inland and creolized dialects as well. Over 100 million people speak the language, and as I said, it is a lingua franca in most of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And students do use it to learn in primary school, but they sometimes use it in secondary school. Otherwise, it has been replaced by English. So how is it used in the world? In many countries, because it is a lingua franca, their papers and broadcasts are in Swahili. It is also used on the administrative side of things for events such as debates, political speeches, trading, law enforcement, and even used in some universities. And as I said multiple times, it is a lingua franca, and because of this, it's useful for Africans to know it, to be able to communicate across the continent. A lot of people's first tongue is their native tribal language, so this is very helpful for them. So what is going to be the most difficult for Swahili speakers while learning English? Well, there are a few things. The first would be the difference in vowel pronunciation. In Swahili, they have 5 vowels that are pronounced how they are written, while in English, we have 5 vowels, but they all have different sounds based on how they're written and the consonants surrounding them. Another difficulty would be intonation, and that's because the intonation of a word can completely change the word. While in English, it doesn't change the word, it just brings a different meaning to the same word. So it's how being said. So, for example, we would say, really? Really? Or really? So it's 3 different ways to say really, but we're still using the same word where they would have a brand new word for how they have said it. Another difference would be word and vowel sounds. Like I mentioned before, they have one way to say their vowels compared to English. However, for the consonants, they have about the same that we do, but most of their consonants can have multiple different sounds based on whether they're voiced or voiceless, where they're being said from, and the aspiration behind the sound. And then the final difficulty I found would be singular versus plural words. So in English, we usually just throw on an S, IES, or ES to the end of a word to make it plural. However, in Swahili, their plural version comes from the beginning of the word, not the end. So this could pose a challenge to someone whose first language is not English. And in English as well, we also have words that remain the same when they're plural, such as deer or sheep. And this, I think, would cause a challenge because in Swahili, when there's is plural, there is a noticeable change in pronunciation. So lesson ideas that I thought of to help with these difficulties would be, for the alphabet, tracing the letters on a paper, coloring pictures of words that start with the letter the teacher said, hangman, and singing the alphabet, as well as just working on it all the time. And then for the vowel sounds, I was thinking about sand writing, where they have it in front of them. The teacher says something and the students have to write in the sand what they think they heard. And sorting pictures based on what they hear To work on word sounds, telephone is a great activity where you say it to a student and the student whispers it to the next and so on and so forth. And at the end you ask the last student what they heard. And that works really well on words in general. Then they could do odd one out, where you give the students a group of words that share similar vowels, similar sound, and have them figure out which one doesn't belong. And dictations are also really good. Not as exciting, but they still are good to help them with their hearing and their writing. And to work on singular versus plural, you could do matching, give them a bunch of words, have them pair them up with the plural version, and also how many in the classroom. So you ask, how many chairs are in the classroom? And the students can either say 1 chair or 10 chairs with the S. So the core elements of Swahili. First, I'll be talking about phonology. In Swahili, there are 29 consonants that have 34 sounds between them. Of these 34 sounds, there are 14 sounds that are voiceless, 8 that are voiced, and 4 that are implosive. The rest do not fall into any of these categories. There are also 5 vowels: I, U, E, O, A. These 5 vowels make up to 11 different sounds in Swahili. The A is pronounced like the A in pasta. E is pronounced like the E in bed. I is pronounced like the E in ski. O is pronounced in the O in or, so O. And U is pronounced like the U in bassoon. How the vowels are pronounced depends on the location of stress and the nasal environment. And the vowel phonemes can occur in any position in a word, while consonant phonemes usually appear in the middle, and the beginning, and sometimes at the end. So let's talk about syllables in Swahili. In Swahili, each vowel counts as a syllable. The smallest syllabic unit is either a single vowel or a syllabic nasal, and longer syllables are usually made up of vowels followed by 1 or more consonants. Allophones in Swahili can be seen in the pictures on the poster, which state where in the body the sound comes from and whether or not it is voiced or voiceless. So you could see here, voiceless aspirate, velar, plosive, voiced labiodental fricative. So I have every consonant and how they're said, where they're said, which was really helpful in my research and, reading through all of the examples given in all the text. It was very helpful to have this so I could hear it without actually hearing it. In Swahili, there are some allophones that occur in some words but not in others. So for example, the allophone R and the allophone L have the same pronunciation. However, R appears more often in Arabic loan words, which is very common in Swahili, while the L appears more frequently in the Bantu words. So because of this, you get some minimal pairs such as Rehemu and Lehemu, or Wari and Wali. So they sound very, very similar. They would be considered minimal pairs. The difficulty in explaining intonations in Swahili results from the influences from other languages such as Arabic, English, and their native tribal tongue. This being said, based on their location in Africa and the cultural influences, intonation is an aspect unique to each specific part of Africa, which is why I think it would be difficult to teach intonation in English. So moving on to the morphology of Swahili. So in Swahili, there's a combination of both free and bound morphemes. However, there are many more bound morphemes than there are free morphemes. The basic word pattern found in Swahili is consonant, vowel, consonant, CVC. Other variations are CWVC, CVNC, or CWVNC. There are times when a word is written that the root of the word is repeated twice to express the action. So for example, you have tetema, which means tremble. You have t repeated twice. On this presentation, I did list some common suffixes, and these suffixes, so they're on here. And so these suffixes right here are used to express different ways the word is used, such as the passive voice, showing a state of being or the potentiality of something, showing the cause in a sentence, showing interdependence, showing opposites, and some of these don't actually even have a rule, they just are there. So something to note is that when using a suffix to show the opposite meaning of a word, it is possible that instead of showing the opposite meaning, it may actually intensify the word itself. There are many times in Swahili when the suffix can be unpredictable to the meaning of a word. On the other hand, it is possible to use multiple suffixes in one word, although there are two rules that need to be followed. The first is that some suffixes need to be connected directly to a root. And the other one is that A can only be added after W when using the passive form. Because of these rules, there are only 9 known combinations of suffixes that are allowed and accepted in Swahili. When creating new words in Swahili, it can happen in many different ways. Some of these ways include different prefixes, different suffixes, the intonation of a word, and also the aspiration. This could change the sound of a consonant, which will ultimately change the word entirely. Most often this happens in the initial position, and is usually connected with the stress of the word as well. So I mentioned suffixes, and I mentioned how prefixes can also change a word. So I just want to talk about prefixes and stems in Swahili for a second. Prefixes are broken up into 3 categories. Nominal, which include nouns, adjectives, and sometimes numbers. Pronominal, which includes personal pronouns, demonstratives, possessives, and interrogatives, and then verbal prefixes and stems. So the nominal prefixes, the only structural difference between nouns and adjectives in Swahili is that the nominal stems in nouns only take certain prefixes, while nominal stems in adjectives can take almost any prefix. Pronominal prefixes include personal pronouns, which are bound and free are being used for people in the first, second, and third person singular. Then there's also demonstratives, and so there are 5 forms that show time, space, proximity, and 2 non-personal class forms. There are also possessives in the singular and plural forms, interrogatives, and then there are also indefinites. Verbal stems, on the other hand, usually have the root word with or without a suffix in the final A. They do not change during conjugations except for the A at the end to an I or an E if it's negative. It is important to note, though, that Arabic loanwords have different endings in different verbal forms. So when I talk about verbal forms, I'm also talking about pragmatics. So the verbal system of Swahili focuses mostly on order. It is positive or negative, the mode, indicative, imperative, subjunctive, etc., and tense, which means if it is marked or unmarked, and these markers indicate time and aspect. The verbal system of Swahili also depends highly on context of what is being said, as in many other languages. In Swahili, there are many words that can be used to suggest a change in conversation, and the pragmatics of Swahili use a lot of the same things that we see in other languages, such as tone, intonation, and the different markers on the words. The conversations that are heard in Swahili can be interpreted different ways based on what the listener hears, so it's extremely important to watch your tone and also give a little bit of context before jumping into the conversation. In expressive